Welcome back to Talking Shop. We're here. This is Epiphany, the third week of Epiphany. We are taking a look at 1 Corinthians. What is this? Chapter 7 verses 29 through 35. We decided to take on that last few verses that they tack on in the lectionary, because without it, this text is really confusing. And
Context.
Yeah. Even with it, it's a little confusing, but you've got to context it, yeah.
That's right. So hopefully we'll give you some ideas on how to preach it. Sorry, there's an odd cutoff in the middle. Hopefully this gets edited right and it becomes seamless. But all that being said,
post-production is everything. Yeah.
Post-production is everything. We thank the man, the master, Paul Koch, for all the work he does. God bless your preaching. Like it, subscribe it, and we'll see you on the next one.
Yeah, let's get to it.
In every way, yet I'm still welcome in the arms of the King.
Welcome back. We are in the third Sunday of Epiphany, right? 1 Corinthians 7, 29 to 31, and this one tags on 32 to 35 to help make it a little more understandable. 29 to 31 by itself, boy, even if you have it read in church, you still might want to preach on this one, or at least do it in Bible study, because it's going to be one of those ones that people are like, what in the world is going on there?
Yeah.
As they do this. Verse 29 is where we're going to start. This is what I mean, brothers. The appointed time has grown very short. From now on, let those who have wives live as though they had none. Which immediately upon reading that, you realize you need context. Knowing full well, when we talked about this, right? Vocation.
Yep.
Right? And all of those things. So what is our context, right? Well, first off, if you go back to verse 25, Paul is talking about people who are engaged, betrothed, right? And he says, I have no command from the Lord, but I give my judgment as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. Is this a biblical command? Yes and no. I mean, it's Paul's opinion, and his opinion is considerable, right?
Yeah.
As we march through this, plus what's the other context? I mean, you talked about it earlier about the idea of Paul's when Jesus was going to come back, right?
Yeah, and that was the understanding in the very early church, that his return was going to be nearly immediate, and it was like a thief, unexpected, like a thief in the night, the way Paul talks about it, the way Peter talks about it, the way Jesus himself even speaks about it. They assumed that within their own lifetime, the Lord would return.
Yes. And will it come like a thief? Yes. But he's a really slow thief, right? I mean,
but a day is like 1,000 years.
Right, yeah, exactly.
God doesn't count time like you count time.
It's been a couple of days for God.
Yeah. Yeah, he's unconcerned with our timeline concerns, right?
We're stuck in time. He's outside of time.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why he doesn't have to count time like you do.
Right. And so Paul goes into this dealing with, right, not so much, this text is not so much about how to deal with your wife as it is how to deal with your perspective, which takes us to verse 30, right? We'll keep moving through it. And those who mourn as though they were not mourning, and those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing, and those who buy as though they had no goods, right? Again, you're going to need more context to this, because this makes it sound like, well, shoot, I shouldn't rejoice, I shouldn't be sad, I shouldn't even go to work. Should I? I mean, that's what it's saying. No, it's not saying that. Let's keep going. 31, and those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. And then we begin to get some context for what he's doing here, right? The second half of verse 31. For this interesting word in the Greek, schemata, right? This schematic of the world is passing away. all of these things, knowing full well that the new heaven and the new earth is coming,
Right.
and all of these things are temporary, and yet still have to be attended to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, you can't, again, like before we started recording, I said we wouldn't want people to hear this and say, oh, I'm going to go be a monk now, and I'm going to leave behind my wife and children and just devote myself completely to prayer. Well, that would be a sin, right? Because God has given you these people to care for, and that is your job. God's given them to you for you to take care of them. So don't go be a monk.
Yeah, yeah. And part of it too is,
I mean, if you're not married, you don't have anybody relying on you.
Yeah.
There
is a Lutheran monastery.
There is a Lutheran monastery, I think, that might be your calling.
Sure.
But if you're already married and you already have kids, you already have a calling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've met a couple of people in my life who that unmarried thing was their calling. I mean, and they were okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, they were fine. At least certainly from the outside. And I've, the conversations that I had with them, and it was an okay thing for them. And they were able to do these very things, right? Because honestly, I don't know about you guys, but if I'm doing this text, I'm adding the next 4 verses as well, because it helps us to understand what's going on. Verse 32, right? Because this entire text, 29 to 31 is the called for text. We've been through that. Still kind of confusing. 32 to 35 is tacked on to help out a little bit. My desire is for you to be free from anxiety. I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord and how to please the Lord. Although, in another place, he would say if the unmarried man is anxious about finding a wife and the stuff that goes with that,
Right.
He should deal with that as well, right? Because it's going to distract him. So this, like you're talking about, this monkism thing, it's not for everybody, but it is for somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with being single, and maybe that's what you could. There's nothing wrong with being married either.
Right.
The Apostle Paul, I think, you may have said this already while we were recording, but I know you've said it today for sure, but keep the main thing the main thing. And the time is coming when the Lord will return. So
Yeah, it goes in line with being in the world but not of the world. Right?
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of times, especially as Lutherans, maybe Missouri Synod Lutherans, we preach a lot to married people. We preach a ton to families. We preach towards relationship. In our culture, to not be in a relationship carries this strange stigma. Well, is he weird? Is he a psycho? Is she gay? Why are they not? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where it's okay to not be in a relationship. And maybe this is a great Sunday to speak specifically to your single people in your congregation who get ignored 90% of the time in church. Speak to them and and it's okay to be single. It's okay to celebrate that singleness and the things that you're able to do that that married guys aren't. I mean, that's the point of verse 33, right? Or married women aren't. But the married man is anxious about worldly things and how to please his wife, right? So it's this divided focus piece. And then he does the same thing. He does that with guys. He does the same thing with women in 34 and 30. Just part of 34. And his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. Again, that dichotomy. But the married woman is anxious about worldly things and how to please her husband. So it's this divided interest piece that he's really going after.
I don't know if this is a way to get at this text at all, but this is where I'm thinking about, because I have 3 daughters and a son, and the goal isn't necessarily that they grow up and get married.
Right.
It's that they're faithful.
Right. In whatever way, right, that you can launch them into society and they can be faithful Christians, married or unmarried, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking about how being married is not necessarily the goal, nor is being single necessarily the goal. And as Adam said before we started recording, or maybe even while we were recording, keep the main thing the main thing.
Yeah.
And the main thing is Jesus is coming back, and that's kind of where it stops, right? He's returning, and we don't need to worry about this Disney princess life that our little girls often are told they're supposed to have. That if they don't have that Prince Charming sweeping them off their feet, then it's not, their life's not full, it's not complete, it's not whole.
Yeah, it's perfectly honorable to not have a spouse and 2.5 kids.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also honorable to do that, you know what I mean? And the vast majority of us will, in some way, shape, or form. But you know, this might just be, you know, Single People Sunday. You know, you get to celebrate who they are and what they're doing and how God has blessed them in that way if they're able to maintain that and be that. People that could, like, I don't understand how you can go to a movie by yourself or 2 movies by yourself and all that stuff. I mean, and I know that's your thing because that's how you rejuvenate and that's how you re-energize your brain, and that's cool. But I don't get it, right? I'm not wired like that.
Because you don't like popcorn.
I don't. Yeah. Fair. I'm gonna get a T-shirt.
Right.
I hate popcorn or something. Yeah.
And the Boy Scouts.
Yeah. yeah, and the BSA, right? I say this for your own benefit. This is the last verse 35. For your own benefit, not to lay restraint upon you, right? So, I mean, this is the point. It's not to say, well, you got to do one or the other per se, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. And that's the bit right there.
Yeah, I think that's where
we make our money. Yeah.
I think you really have to bring in these last 4 verses, 32 through 35.
Yeah.
Really gives you more to preach on, but to encourage honorable, undistracted devotion to the Lord. I think that's one of the clincher verses in this whole passage, right? And what's going to preach in my situation and in my context, in that in my world, most of the people I interact with treat church as an extracurricular activity. It's an extra thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, if they don't have something else going on Sunday, then they'll be at church. It's not that they don't like going to church. That's not it at all. Yeah,
they like doing it because it's an extracurricular activity. It's an extra thing,
and they know it's good for them.
Right. Yeah. As opposed to probably more akin to us, where like our whole world revolves, and not just because it's our profession, right? But probably Jesus being the center and substance of our lives.
One would hope.
Right? Like
right. Yeah.
That like we view everything through this Christological Jesus-centered lens. And like Jesus is our life, and we view everything else through this Jesus lens, which then led us to professional ministry.
Right.
But most of our people, I don't think, at least in my context, don't view the world in that way. There are 15 million other things that have priority in their lives and that they view the world through.
Yeah.
And I get an hour a week to try to convince them, hey, I know you've been watching and listening to all these other things that are saying this is the most important thing in your world. And I get an hour a week to say, actually, those things are not all that important because the form of this world, the present form of this world is passing away.
Yeah.
Right? So all of these other things that you're finding important, that you're spending your time and energy and emotional energy on.
Yeah, and even your money.
Right? Like all of that stuff's going to pass away. Moth is going to eat all of that stuff.
And that's the point of the entire text, right?
Rust is going to like destroy all of those things that you think are really important.
Yeah.
But I'm here to tell you that Jesus is going to come back and you're going to be raised from the dead.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking eternal life here. So all of these other things that are going to be destroyed are not nearly as important as Christ crucified and risen for you.
Mm-hmm.
He's coming back and he's going to raise you from the dead.
Right. Yeah. And that, if you're preaching this, I think that's I think you kind of blaze through this text, get to this 35, and then talk about all the ways that our attention is divided.
Yeah.
Or you don't have to hit all of them.
Right.
There's too many, but do a triplet, right, for rhetoric, where you can use 3 different things and how it divides our attention, and then you can kind of do the compare contrast bit, just like Paul does here.
Right.
The compare contrast bit, and he's done it with being single versus being married, and you can do it with other things as well.
Right.
And then just compare contrast and get that point across that we're called to be focused to something else. Yeah, that's a good way to go. Good.
The prime example that I always use is there's a guy that shows up to Bible study, and God bless him that he shows up regularly. But his primary hermeneutic when he reads a biblical text is, who's the Republican and who's the Democrat in this text?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, you're completely missing the point, because you're reading it with an American political hermeneutic.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, you're trying to read things into the text.
Yeah.
Rather than looking at American politics and the entire rest of your world through this lens of death and resurrection, right? Like, that is Lutheran discipleship. It's death and resurrection.
Yeah. Surprise, surprise, Jesus doesn't have a party affiliation, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like,
And if he does, it's not yours.
It's not
right?
yours, yeah. It's something else. It ain't yours.
There's
So
law
it's,
and gospel to be preached to all of the political parties.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Exactly
For sure.
right.
Early on, I've been trying to think of the 2 words that you said that were like, one goes one way and then one goes the other way for this text, and it could have been a good way to frame this out. So in the comments, maybe you can find those 2 words and say, oh, this would be the structure.
Oh, yeah.
But you were laying out a good point, and then I
Compare and contrast.
It could have been a compare and contrast, but it
Because
was,
that's what Paul's doing, right?
Yeah.
Kind of to touch back on the monastic life conversation we were having a minute ago, right? Love God, love your neighbor as yourself, right? This is not in contrast to that. This doesn't contradict, right? He's not saying, hey, love God so much that you fail to love your neighbor, right? It's never an either or. It's a both and, right? Both tables of the law, right?
Well,
love God
and in fact,
and love your neighbor.
Right? And in fact, the single person has more time to love their neighbor, and not just their spouse, but a wider range of neighbors.
There are more neighbors.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
Yes,
Exactly.
you love your neighbor, who you share a house with,
Right.
And you share a
Right.
bank account with.
Right.
That, like, all of the people in my house are also my neighbors.
Right, right. All of them. Yeah, love your neighbor. Good. Like, subscribe, which, by the way, the like, subscribe thing is not for our benefit so much as it is when you click those buttons, the algorithm goes into play.
The almighty
right?
algorithm.
The almighty algorithm. And it will help other guys or gals, if they're looking for Bible studies or whatever. Some gals preach too, not in our synod, but in other synods. But it will help them find it, because what it'll do is it'll raise that. So so part of the reason why we asked you to click is because it leans it into the algorithm.
Yep.
And so not only can God bless your preaching, but it'll bless other people's preaching as well. Good. We'll see you soon.